They came here and excavated 7 burial caves. These caves date back to the 7th century BC, around the time of King Josiah. Most of them, however, had already been looted. History sometimes whispers softly, offering small glimpses into how ancient people lived. But there are other moments when the past speaks loudly, almost thunderously, forcing long-held beliefs to pause and be reconsidered. What you are about to hear is not a legend, not a medieval manuscript, and not a later theological argument. It is a discovery that lay buried beneath the soil of Jerusalem for over 2,600 years, silent and waiting for its moment to speak. The artifact is small, fragile, and made of silver, but its message is immense. It carries a name, a blessing, and a covenant formula that predates empires, scriptures, and religious movements that would arise centuries later. When it was uncovered, scholars immediately understood that history had shifted. Before we continue, if you enjoy calm, easy-to-understand videos exploring the Bible, history, and archaeology, please consider subscribing to our channel. Just outside the ancient walls of Jerusalem lies the Valley of Hinnom. For centuries it appeared unremarkable. Travelers passed by, unaware that beneath its rocky terraces rested one of the most significant biblical discoveries ever made. The valley witnessed kings, prophets, invasions, and exile. It saw Jerusalem rise, fall, and rise again, yet it guarded its secret well. This location, known as Ketef Hinnom, formed part of the western boundary of ancient Jerusalem during the time of the biblical kings. Archaeologists had long known that the area contained First Temple period tombs. What no one expected was that one of those tombs held something far more significant than bones or pottery. It held words, sacred words. These words were engraved long before Arabic existed, long before Islam arose, and long before debates about the preservation of Scripture began. In 1979, Professor Gabriel Barkay, one of Israel's most respected archaeologists, led a small educational excavation at Ketef Hinnom. His goal was simple: to teach school children how archaeology works. There was no expectation of uncovering anything extraordinary, but history often reveals itself through ordinary moments. Among the children was a 12-year-old boy whose curiosity got the better of him. While exploring a burial chamber, he lightly struck a limestone wall with his hammer. To everyone's surprise, a thin panel collapsed inward, revealing a hidden repository untouched since around 600 BC. What emerged was astonishing. Pottery vessels, beads, skeletal remains, and small metal objects spilled from the chamber. Among them were 2 tiny, tightly rolled pieces of silver, darkened by age and barely recognizable. Professor Barkay immediately sensed their importance, even before knowing what they contained. With a single tap of a child's hammer, a sealed message from the age of the prophets was reopened. This burial chamber was no ordinary grave. It belonged to a wealthy, or possibly priestly, family of ancient Judah. The limestone walls were carved with benches and burial niches, showing generations of use. Most importantly, the chamber showed no signs of looting. Human hands had not disturbed it since the First Temple period. The silver objects were identified as amulets, personal items worn for protection or buried with the dead as expressions of faith and hope. But these amulets were unlike any others. Their craftsmanship was exceptional, and their surfaces were covered with microscopic inscriptions, impossible to read without magnification. If these inscriptions were Hebrew, they would be older than any biblical manuscript ever discovered. Excitement soon gave way to a daunting challenge. After lying underground for 2,600 years, the silver had become extremely fragile, brittle like a thin shell. Any careless movement could cause it to crumble. At the Israel Museum, conservators undertook one of the most delicate restoration efforts in archaeological history. Over 3 painstaking years, they worked millimeter by millimeter using microscopes, micro-tools, chemical softening agents, and extraordinary patience. Every movement carried risk. Slowly, almost impossibly, the scrolls began to open. When the first letters emerged, time seemed to stop. Professor Barkay later recalled recognizing the very first word immediately. The ancient Hebrew letters spelled the divine name, YHWH, known as Yahweh, sometimes rendered as Jehovah. This was not a title. It was the covenant name of the God of Israel, engraved into silver in the 7th century BC. The implications were staggering, but the scrolls had more to say. As the inscriptions were fully deciphered, their message became unmistakable. They contained the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. The wording matched the biblical text with remarkable precision. This was not a paraphrase. It was not a later theological development. It was the same blessing, structured the same way, using the same divine name preserved in the Hebrew Bible today. These scrolls predate the Dead Sea Scrolls by nearly 4 centuries. They predate the Septuagint, they predate Christianity, and they predate Islam by more than 1,000 years. Islam teaches that earlier scriptures, including the Torah, were corrupted long before the rise of Islam. According to this view, essential elements of divine revelation, including God's name and covenant structure, were altered or lost over time. Yet here lies an artifact engraved centuries before such claims existed. A physical object sealed in a tomb, untouched by later editors or religious communities. It contains the divine name. It contains the blessing. It contains covenant language exactly as found in today's Torah. This presents a historical challenge that cannot be easily dismissed. The silver scrolls demonstrate that the core content of the Torah was already fixed and in use during the First Temple period. There was no later rewriting, no medieval alteration, no gradual invention. Archaeology does not argue. It testifies. Imagine the man who commissioned this amulet. He lived while Solomon's temple still stood, or shortly before its destruction. He heard priests pronounce this blessing aloud. He believed the name of Yahweh carried power, protection, and promise. An artisan carefully engraved those sacred words into silver, trusting they would guard him in life and accompany him in death. He could never have imagined that his personal expression of faith would one day stand at the center of a global theological debate. Silver does not burn easily. It does not rot. It waits. And for 2,600 years, it waited. When Professor Barkay published his findings, the scholarly world took notice. These scrolls are universally recognized as the oldest biblical text ever discovered. They demonstrate that Israel's faith, scriptures, and understanding of God were already fully formed long before later religions emerged. Empires rose and fell above that tomb: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and later Islamic caliphates. The silver scrolls remained silent, yet undefeated. Buried for 2,600 years, they emerged in our generation to testify to the reliability of the biblical record, and to challenge claims that the Torah was corrupted before history could remember. Today,